my name is Juliette. I'm coordinator for the One Democratic State initiative. I'm very happy to have you today and to discuss a bit about your vision of ODS, but more generally about your experience. So maybe before we start, you can introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Nizar Farsakh. I'm a Palestinian who was born and raised in Dubai. Studied at American University of Beirut in the 90s. And then in 99, I moved with my parents to the West Bank, to my father's village, Birzeit, 3 minutes north of Ramallah. Worked there for 10 years, the last 5 years of which were in negotiations. Excuse my cat. So I was responsible for border-related issues at the negotiating team from 2003 till end of 2008. And then I moved to, I did a master's in public administration with a focus on leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School. Loved it so much that I stayed 1 more year to be a teaching assistant there. And 2011, I moved to DC and worked for 2 years at the Palestinian delegation, which is like the Palestinian embassy. So I got to actually do some advocacy and some lobbying and get introduced into how that works in DC. And since then, I've been training people on leadership negotiations and advocacy, and I teach negotiations at GW.
Great, great, thank you. It's I find your profile very interesting, and it's not always that we have the chance to speak with somebody who has this experience in negotiation, advocacy, leadership. So yeah, that's really great. Maybe before we dive into these questions and how it meets your vision and your experience as a Palestinian, can you share what is your vision of the future of Palestine, and whether it's in or outside of a democratic state?
Well, definitely, I think it is necessary to have a system, some sort of system where every individual has not only their rights protected, but also to have the feeling that they are safe and safe to practice their faith or practice being secular without fear of intimidation or discrimination. And I believe that because I believe until everybody in that region from the river to the sea feels that way, or at least a majority of the people there feel that way, there is always the incentive for those who are with less rights to find ways to get the rights. So it will never be stable. So I learned to not be attached to one state or two state. I'm more attached to the result. We need a result that ends up being not only fair, but practically results in an equitable result. It's easy to say, oh, everybody's equal. Even in the US, in theory, everybody's equal, but African Americans and people of color don't get treated the same way, right? So I think that's one of the bigger hurdles people who are coming with political platforms need to address. How do you make people believe that the result of what you're suggesting is going to be an equitable result?
I'm wondering if to reach this result, what do you think can be steps or what can be emphasized?
So I think what needs to be emphasized is separating the two things, what we want and why we want it. So when people say we want the two-state, it is, they say because they want to be able to be Palestinian and be free to practice being Palestinian without interference of any Israeli or anyone else for that matter. And when Israelis say they want a Jewish state, it is because they believe that they are not safe unless they are a majority in any state. That their experience has been for thousands of years that being a minority is always has always the risk of a pogrom. So we need to, and therefore they think a Jewish state is the solution. So that's what they want because they think that's going to solve the problem of anti-Semitism and a history of persecution. And likewise, Palestinians who argue for a two-state believe that that's a solution that is acceptable internationally and therefore possible, They believe they have a right to the whole entirety of Palestine, but they don't think that's achievable. So if we try to address the why people want what they want, like why do people want to go back to their villages and what have you, then we can come up with a solution that is that addresses the roots of the problem, or the roots of why people want what they want, and not get stuck in the position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And with your experience and with your expertise in this field of negotiation, how does this experience interact with your vision? Is it something that you're able to maybe push for? Has it, on the contrary, influenced it or contradicted it?
Indeed. So because I actually did work in negotiations, and I worked in second track negotiations, which is talks between people who do not represent their constituencies, just, basically brainstorming ideas. I've witnessed how people can make very big shifts in their position if they feel that there is credibility in them getting something that's very important to them. A lot of the positioning or posturing has to do with lack of faith that either they have the capacity to get what they want, or that whatever the international system or whatever ecosystem we are in is not going to let me get what I want, and therefore I need to stick to my position. And once you get into a conversation of interests, it becomes a much broader conversation, and we start seeing that we discover, in fact, that there are things that the other side has that we didn't know was valuable to us. And likewise, we discover that we have things that are valuable to the other side that the other side also didn't realize that we have, right? So it's by focusing on problem solving as opposed to protecting our position. Of course, it takes risk and courage, but it also takes confidence in your position, right? Or in your rights. I've seen things that people say, oh, that's impossible, suddenly become possible, right? And one of them was just something simple as up to 1999, in fact, up to 2000, the Israeli position was that Jerusalem was not negotiable. But when Barak sat with Abu Ammar, with Yasser Arafat in 2000, when an actual deal was at the table that would have been possible, suddenly he started looking into, okay, we can look at this neighborhood and that neighborhood, or the fact that Ariel Sharon, the person who had spearheaded the settlement movement, was the one who withdrew from the Gaza Strip. So my hope comes from the fact that these impossible things suddenly become possible if the stars align, but also if people are focusing on their goal and not getting distracted by side battles.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I like this approach. I'm wondering now that you said that, if you think, like, looking at the landscape and how things are at the moment, are there things that seem impossible that you think that you see things happening behind, or certain changes in narratives or in actions that make you think that maybe it's not that impossible?
For me, as a person who used to be religious and then became secular, because I felt like people who are religious are very dogmatic, I'm very pleasantly surprised at how religious people on both sides, in fact, might be the key to unlocking, a resolution. Of course, they're not a monolith. They think in many ways. And if we have a conversation over what they want and why they want it, there seems to be a lot of inroads there that can be very game-changing.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see it this way. Maybe you can develop a little bit on how these religious people from different sides can contribute.
So religious people have certain, core beliefs. They are committed to certain, articles of faith, committed to delivering or being a certain way. and they interact with the secular world based on that, always choosing and even taking risks in order to make sure that their commitment to God or their commitment to their faith is not compromised by, you know, temporal challenges. So they are in fact agnostic to the nature of the state, of who has sovereignty over the state, so long as they can practice their faith, and they, of course, are physically safe, but also safe from intimidation, safe from persecution because of their faith, right? So when we spoke in those second tracks, we discovered a lot of the Israeli religious settlers really didn't care if they were part of a Palestinian state or not. They just wanted to live in this area that has biblical significance. And if they are under a Palestinian sovereign state, so long as they have rights to live and worship there, they don't care if they're ruled by Palestinians or by Israelis. Or, for example, when we spoke with a lot of refugees, to take a secular example, many of them, the issue was righting a wrong, that while they suffered for 75 years being refugees, the last thing they want to be told is they just need to give up their right of return and not have an acknowledgement that somebody took their land, took their house. If there is a resolution where the person now occupying the house admits that, okay, this is your house and I'll be your rent, I will be your tenant, that goes a long way, because they do not want to live back in their villages. They just want this recognition that I'm a human being, I have my dignity. The last thing I control is, my ability to say that this is right or this is wrong. And if you acknowledge that what was done was wrong and that this is my house and you're renting, then I don't have a problem now with you, right? It's a question, and then you pay me rent and what have you. So it's getting to those what matters to people more. And this is something, for example, we know for a fact that in Camp David and also later negotiations, the Israelis really underestimated how important it was for Palestinians that Israel acknowledges its culpability in 1948. They thought it was just a numbers game and it was like 50,000 and didn't realize that if there was a genuine acknowledgement that this was a great wrong that was done to Palestinians and that they have a right to their property and their lands and the right of return, we can negotiate how this right of return is exercised rather than just negate that right. They really underestimated that it's negating the right that is the problem, not the exercise of the right.
Yeah, but isn't there also a risk that if we focus on the acknowledgement, because there are also some refugees that are willing, that would like to return.
Yeah.
So we need to find also this balance. How can we kind of reconcile both?
Precisely, it's because people want to return for different reasons, as we said, right? Negotiating how that happens so that each party, or because also it's more than one party, right? There is a tension between the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and Palestinians who are in the diaspora. They have different, circumstances, and therefore they have different priorities. But if we have a conversation of acknowledging each other's rights and working together to see how we can exercise these rights without transgressing on the other, then that would be the solution. In fact, that's the whole problem with Zionism, is that Zionists believe that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination, and they at least in practice, have been fine exercising that right at the expense of others. That's the main challenge. Most Israelis know that the Palestinians are being wrong. They just have the conviction that the Jews have been wronged more, and therefore the fact that the Palestinians suffer is a price they're willing to pay in order to safeguard Jews. So one Jewish life is worth 1,000 Palestinian lives. They actually do say that, right? So until that changes, until they have the courage to take risk and believe that, no, if everybody's treated equally, then you are safe, as opposed to, no, having an ethno-state is the only way to save yourself, then if we change that conviction, then we will have a breakthrough.
Yeah, and what can be the role of negotiations in this? Because we're talking at society level. So what can be the role of international negotiation, and what can be the role of other means of action?
So I'll start with the second one, which is in any negotiation, the means do matter, and you can achieve more at the negotiating table the more you have a credible alternative, right? What's called the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, a BATNA. The more, like if I'm buying a car, the more I have an actual, option or alternative to go buy the car from another dealer with, a cheaper price, that gives me leverage in negotiating with this dealer, the one in front of me, right? Likewise, war is just another form of making the other side come to the negotiating table on different terms. It's just another form of diplomacy. It's just aggressive diplomacy. Ultimately, you're making the other side realize, and deterrence, for example, making them realize they're better off coming to an agreement with you rather than risk violence or risk war. So that's how liberation movements work, right? They make the occupation too costly. And that's exactly what happened with Sharon in the Gaza Strip. It was too expensive for 8,000, to protect 8,000 settlers. But more importantly, the strategic value Sharon saw, was that by withdrawing from the Gaza Strip, he can release Israel from its, moral and political obligation towards a peaceful solution. They could make the argument, oh, well, we withdrew from the Gaza Strip, land for peace doesn't work, right? And he actually, one of his advisors, Don Weissglass, he specifically said that the withdrawal from Gaza allows us to put the peace process in formaldehyde, right? So it is a question of what alternative you can provide or have available so that the other party is incentivized to come to negotiate. The challenge we've had with Palestinian negotiators is that they did not have an alternative that motivated the Israelis to give anything. There was no motivation or incentive for them to give anything because the status quo was fine. And in fact, we did have a situation where just before 2000, before going to Camp David, there was people from our team who were talking with or having talks with an Israeli group. And they were talking about Jerusalem, and the Israelis saying, no, it's out of the question. Jerusalem is non-negotiable. So the Palestinian, our colleagues said, okay, listen, if like we want the two-state solution, we want a Palestinian state in order to achieve our right to self-determination. If this state is not going to have Jerusalem, it's like, for us, it's pointless. Like there is so much of our identity that has to do with the three holy sites, with Jerusalem being the capital and so important, and us being the protectors of the holy sites, that part of our Palestinian identity. So if in the two-state solution, in your view, the Palestinians will not have any sovereignty over East Jerusalem, then maybe we should look at the one-state solution. Suddenly, the Israelis say, okay, like maybe there is this neighborhood in Jerusalem that maybe it would be part of an Arab state, because now suddenly there was an alternative that was worse for at least those Israeli Zionists, right? Because if the choice is between splitting Jerusalem or giving East Jerusalem to the Palestinians, or having a state where Jews are not a majority, the former is a much better choice, right? And that's the nature of all negotiations. Good negotiators understand that they do not need to be beholden to a framework or a structure of a negotiation that is disadvantageous to them. So that's the first thing about the means and how you can have momentum towards a settlement. I already forgot the first one. What was the first one?
So I was asking about the role of international negotiation and the complementarity with the other means of actions.
Yeah, so definitely at least what I've learned working directly in negotiations is that it does need to be from the grassroots up. The main crime or sin of Oslo, and that was why it was never going to work, was that it was agreed in secret. It had no legitimacy. It was a bet. Maybe our leaders made a good deal. We don't know. Let's check. But had they actually worked from, you know, town hall meetings and community internal Palestinian and internal Israeli conversations over what is really important to us in refugees, what is really important for us in Jerusalem, what are we willing to be flexible on in order to get this on refugees and in order to get that on Jerusalem, right? If we had that conversation, then whoever is negotiating actually does have the legitimacy and the power at the negotiating table to come to an agreement, because they've already understood what are the contours, what are the red lines, what are the areas of flexibility, why certain things are important. So for example, when we looked at borders and border exchanges, territorial exchanges, we realized that us and the Israelis had different valuations of the same piece of land. They wanted it for a different reason. So there are a lot of creative ways in which both parties can use the territory for what they want it for, right? As I gave the example of the settlers, right? Where those settlers simply want to live in that location and be able to freely worship, right? They're completely agnostic whether they're ruled by Palestinians or ruled by Israelis. So they don't care about sovereignty. We care about sovereignty, right? So a solution would be that they would be Israeli permanent residents in the Palestinian state, right? With their rights protected. And they would vote in the Israeli state. Likewise with, you know, early warning stations and so on and so forth, or water and agricultural land. So a lot of creative solutions can come if the two sides start discussing the interest behind why they want something, because then it becomes a broader conversation. Now, if once you bring it down to the grassroots, then you find that Jerusalemites have amazing bridging proposals and ideas outside the box, because they live in Jerusalem. They know that Jerusalem does not function if it doesn't have a solid and strong and robust economic you know, system. The city doesn't work. And likewise, nobody disagrees with the fact that you need access to religious sites, right? People in Hebron, or people on the borders, or people in Jericho, right? They know their situation better than, or Gazans for that matter, right? They know their situation very well, and they know very well what are their priorities. We should trust our people, right? Both our peoples, in knowing what's good for them and what they're willing to be flexible on, and what they believe is a red line. Once all of that is aggregated, then you actually have not only the legitimacy, but actually the creative ideas. The ideas actually come from the ground up. These are much better ideas than, you know, a leader up there who's detached from reality, or detached from those who have a stake. Those who have a stake usually are the people that get the better ideas. A mother has much better ideas on how her child could succeed in school than their teacher sometimes, you know? So whoever has a stake usually has, because they have a stake and are going to be implicated by the negotiation and the solution, they are more serious, they are much more creative, and they're invested. That's the important thing. They're not in it because they want to get elected next year. They're in it because their actual lives directly is impacted. Just like now, the people in Gaza are fighting over who decides what happened to Gaza, right? Because they are the ones who are paying the price. We can, you know, keep wishing that the Gazans keep fighting for another 100 years, right? We're not the ones who are paying the price outside, right? So it's a question of, do you get the people with the stake at the table, so that when we come to an agreement, they feel that they've contributed to it, and that their red lines have been taken into consideration, and the areas they are flexible in, and the ideas that they offered actually were helpful and enriched the negotiation.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to react a bit to some of the elements that you're talking about. And for example, you were saying some of the ideas that were shared of having this kind of pockets of citizenship from like different sides. I was wondering, what is your perception on how it would translate in practice, knowing, for example, the level of settler violence that we see today? How can having pockets of settlers that are here as like how can this not lead to further violence?
Of course, those who are violent arguably, you can split them between those who are violent because they feel they are not safe. So you get a resolution that makes them feel safe. But there are those who are violent because they genuinely feel that Arabs have no business being there and that the land is not pure because Arabs are there. So clearly, these are people that you cannot negotiate with, right? But what we found is, in fact, like also the settlers are not a monolith. Something like 80% to 90% even of the settlers are there because of quality of life reasons. So when you actually offer them to move to different areas in Israel proper without changing their quality of life, they are more willing and in fact are eager to leave because they just do not want to be in a risky situation. So there is much more room for new options if we actually get to the the nitty-gritty and not just taking the settlers as a bulk of 800,000 human beings. These have different interests, different goals, and either way, even if these were not settlers, anybody who believes that the other side doesn't have a right to exist is a non-starter. These people will need to be addressed by the majority who have a stake in losing the area, right? Because if I remember, I learned this actually from from a cousin of mine who was detained in the first Intifada. He is PFLP, Popular Front, so leftist. But that back then in the 80s or late 80s, he was detained and put in a tent, in a detention camp, in a tent with Hamas and Fatah detainees. And he said, like, the Fatah and Hamas guys would often fight. And he said, like, it's not like I cannot interfere. We're like in the same tent. I'm getting kicked while I'm in the tent. So I have to interfere, right? Because I'm getting the hit. So it's kind of like that. It's the people with the stake that will be able to, deter the radicals because they actually have something to lose.
Okay. Yeah, I think that, so, there are things that are common with the approach of ODS, this idea of having same rights and everybody recognized within their right and as a equal democratic level. But in what you're saying, there are also things that are different. And one of the elements that I think is different is the politicization of identity. Because for us, this question of politicizing identity, so saying you're a Jew or you're an Israeli, so you have a certain representation and certain government, you're Palestinian, Muslim, Christian, secular, you have another representation or different political rights. We think that having this differentiation is a cause of violence. Because it transforms the state in kind of machines of power, and where there is a balance of power that is always in question, that can create conflict. But I know that you have a different perspective on this. So I would like also to hear from you, what do you think of this, and how do you think it can reconcile or not with a democratic state?
I don't disagree with this diagnosis. I just disagree on the way to address it and the possibility to address it. So all nationalisms are racist. I mean, that ultimately, right? All nationalisms try to claim that there is one national narrative. And we know for a fact that that's obviously not true, right? Of course, it's an exercise of power, and the government, right, the authority, through education, through media, through cultural stuff, imposes that, right? So you have a situation where, just like 1,000 years ago, we were part of the empire, right? There was a conviction that the sovereign was sovereign because they had either religious, even in the East, like there was a reason why this person or this family or this clan should be in power for whatever mythology there is, right? That's how human beings get organized. The nation state is the latest iteration of that. And it has its own flaws. In fact, that's how the First and Second World War happened. Ultimately, after the Second World War, Europeans realized that yes, nationalism is amazing, but ultimately human rights is more important, right? Where what good is nationalism if you're going to have a situation like Dreyfus, or a situation where Alsace and Lorraine and what have you, right? Where really is national identity worth dying for? Or is this a situation and the person lives here and it's just the boundary that moved, you know, like he always lived there, right? So we have, you probably know the expression in Arabic. It's بدك عنب ولا بدك تقاتل النطور? Do you want grapes or do you want to fight with the guardian of the vineyard? As people lose track, they think by being nationalistic, by being patriotic, they are protecting their individual rights. They don't realize that they're playing into the nationalist hegemony culture. I don't want to say a people as much as a system. Just like here in the US, you have Democrats and Republicans. That's another dominant narrative, a sort of hegemony that works and is perpetuated by people in power, people who are benefiting from it, right? So that's the nature of things. It's ideally, yes, we would have non-politicized identities, because of course our identities are very complex. But that's not how the world is organized, and that's not how, more importantly, the distribution of military power, right? The one government, one gun, that monopolization of force is not along those individual rights paradigm. They're along ethnic, nationalist, or sometimes in other places like Saudi Arabia or ISIS, religious denominations, or Iran for that matter, right? So in order to address that, we're gonna need to first address people's basic needs of safety, security, food, economic prosperity, right? And education and health. And then we'll be able to talk about more universal identities. So long as people are scared for their lives, so long as people are scared that they don't have a way of providing for their families, none of those things are going to be relevant. They're going to go with anybody who says, well, the problem is that ethnic group, and once we get rid of them, everything's going to fall into place because we are whatever identity it is. You've seen that in the Balkans, you've seen that in Southeast Asia, right? The fact that the Pakistanis and the Indians, it's the same culture, right? But because Muslims, a group of Muslims, let's to be fair, did not feel safe because there were Hindu fascists, again, they were not a majority, they felt, well, given the system, like if this happened 500 years ago, they wouldn't have thought of a separate Muslim state. It's just because in the 20th century, the world was, or the world adopted a nation state system, right? Especially after the First World War, where the empires were broken up into countries, and the idea of self-determination became popular, and then you had the League of Nations and then United Nations. They thought that's the best way to protect themselves, right? But are Muslims safer with other Muslims? ISIS would argue not, right? That's an example of where Sunni Muslims killed more Sunni Muslims than any other ethnic group, again, because the premise is wrong. The premise is somehow if I join a group and we become this insular group, we will be safer because we're the tribe and the tribe sticks together. Well, it sticks together to the extent that the tribe treats each other fairly and equitably, and everybody has equal access to prosperity, right? I think that's a larger conversation that cannot be had until a critical mass of rights are secured first.
Well, thank you. That's again very interesting. It kind of relates to the questions that I wanted to ask you also about the state of Arab civil society and the link with visibility of democracy. I know that you also worked a lot on this. I don't know if you can maybe tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So between 2013 and 2015, I worked with a think tank in DC that where my job was helping Arab NGOs. It was after the Arab Spring, helping Arab NGOs and think tanks do advocacy in their countries. So I'm a big believer in the Arab Spring. I do believe that the genie is out of the bottle. As horrible as the situation is now, I do not think that we are going to go back. You can see that in women. Like I've seen my female relatives, precisely because there is a much clearer and much more intense sense of individual rights. We are moving in the right direction. So even with how horrible the situation is in Egypt with Sisi, that's a counter-revolution, because those who are in power, of course, they don't have an interest in minimizing their power, right? But ultimately, the Egyptian people are somewhere else. Likewise in Syria. Yes, we might not be very big fans of Julani, but to be quite honest, anything is better than Assad. It's this need to have the politics back to the communal level. I believe it's a step in the right direction. And yes, all Arab countries are fictitious, right? They were drawn by Sykes-Picot. Arguably, maybe Egypt and Iraq have some, historical claim to being an independent or a separate culture, to some extent, maybe. But even those identities matter less. Are Egyptians really, not Phoenicians? What am I saying? Ancient Egyptians? Not really. Like they try to play that. Oh, we are the progeny of the ancient Egyptians. What is left of that besides the pyramids? So I think those things become less important. The more we realize that a nation means nothing, a country means nothing, if its citizens do not feel safe and proud being citizens, and so on and so forth. The collapsing of the idea of the state and the practice of the state is a problem. People think that the way states are now, which is oppressive by definition, right? By elections. In some places, the elections are fairer than other places, sure. Usually those countries are very inconsequential countries where nobody cares what happens in that country, like Lithuania, let's say, or let's say Denmark. It's like, okay, like there is no geopolitical play, right? But in the Middle East, in let's say Russia or in Korea, it becomes a thing, right? Like everybody wants to interfere because there are really big financial and political interests that get implicated. So we need to, and I believe this is more possible now with a more connected world, to bring things again back to the basics. It's like, do I have in this system the ability to live my life the way I want to be, the way I see myself, regardless of my sexual orientation or my gender or my color of my skin, right? In a way that I feel I'm not doing something because I have to, right? But because I am comfortable doing it, and we might disagree, and then we might, through a majority vote, come to a decision that I dislike, but I accept and find legitimate the process by which the decision was made, then that will provide us with peace. Just like Belgium has two very different identities, the Flanders and the French speaking. And they've been able to live. And now, of course, Belgium is very small, and Europe has no appetite for another civil war, right? There is enough of civil rights being protected that there is no sense of need to have a civil war, unlike the Basque in Spain, right? So there is a minimum of human rights that need to be respected before people make a connection that, oh, we need to be our separate state in order to get our full rights. We will never be able to exercise our full rights unless we are a separate state, which is Zionism, right? Again, that conflation is the problem. When we think, which is of course the problem with the Islamists, is that if you have an Islamic state, everything's going to be fine. It's like, no, not really. If you don't respect the rights of others, we're still going to have a problem. And that, I think, is where the conversation, because of how gruesome the wars are becoming and how horrible human rights transgressions are becoming, more people who were on the sidelines, more of the silent majority is actually start getting activated.
And if we look at the scale of the region of the Middle East, and what you are talking about, both the changes, the fact that there is more acknowledgement of individual rights, but also what you are saying about the violation of human rights and states around that are very oppressive. How does this interfere with the situation in Palestine? How does it interfere with the feasibility also of a democratic state?
So, while risking I do not want to appear as a Palestinian chauvinist, but for better or worse, Palestine happens to be the one case where that contradiction of the promise of democracy and the promise of human rights fails miserably in the practice of actual states, right? It's such a blatant transgression of human rights. It's such a blatant transgression to national and individual rights that it becomes a symbol of people's, the general public's discontentment with the system, right? It's just so clear, right? I would argue that it's not the most important conflict in the world. There are other conflicts that are causing more deaths. You have Congo, you have a lot of other places. Syria, you had a 250,000 or maybe 500,000 dead and what have you. But because it's such a stark dichotomy between big business, between the military industrial complex, between colonial powers, right? All of that faction that is made up of might makes right, the US, right? Versus those who are at the receiving end of being exploited, right? Palestine is such a clear manifestation of that. So it becomes a shorthand for that. And therefore, those same oppressive regimes do not like Palestinians, do not like how Palestinians think, do not like how Palestinians talk, because we actually talk about our rights. We still don't have our rights. I've had Egyptian friends who told me that they had the courage to go in protests in 2011 because the Palestinians were their role models. Like the Palestinians are fighting the Zionists. We surely can fight, the Mubarak. So it's the example of Palestine that is very dangerous. That it is possible that defenseless people can continue to persist even 100 years of oppression hasn't silenced them. That's a very scary thought for any regime. That there is Palestinians are testament to the power of human resilience. And that's a very bad example if you're a dictator. You want people to think that and that's why there is so much investment. Do not be fooled. Like the Arab states are part and parcel of this war. They are petrified that Israel would lose. They need Israel to win. They need Israel, regardless of what we think. I am very critical of Hamas, by the way. But as far as David and Goliath is dying to be proven right. And they do not, they're inside of them, they are worried that they know that David every now and then does win. So it's that kind of it's almost Oedipal. The more they try to oppress the Palestinians, the more they try to stifle dissent, the stronger the dissent and the louder. Like now in the US, it's just phenomenal. You couldn't say I am an anti-Zionist 2 years ago. Now everybody says it. It's the fact that first, how blind, which is normal. Usually empires are blind because of their power. Their power blinds them. They don't see accurately what's happening. When you have the Israeli ambassador to the US, and this was probably 7 years ago, if not more, saying there is no point trying to, win over the Jewish Americans. We need to focus only on evangelicals. Okay, so non-Jews are the bigger supporters of Israel. What does that tell you about the Zionist project? Fascists in Europe are the biggest fans of Israel. Anti-Semitic fascists in Europe are the biggest fans of Israel. What does that tell you? Right? So the fact that they're making Zionism, that is so exposing what Zionism is about, right? That it is an ideology that is inherently racist because it believes that people from another place geographically somehow have superior rights from people that actually lived there for 100 years, right? To be able to entertain this idea, you have to think that the other is not equal to you. You have to think that somehow the Holocaust justifies treating the others, the whole world differently, that this exceptionalism of Israel, that everything applies everywhere except in Israel, somehow human rights do not apply. Those same universal values, when it comes to Israel, because of the Holocaust, somehow there is much more compassion, there is much more benefit of the doubt, and so on and so forth. That paradigm, right, that standard where, so because it's not able, Israel at least, the Zionists are unable to continue to function, the Israeli state, without greater and greater oppression, right? It's much harder for them to disguise the essence of what Zionism is about, right? When you're arguing to believe that people from a different geographical region somehow have more rights than the people who lived in that land for hundreds of years, you need to think that the other is less than. You need to think that the Holocaust just is so horrible, and the fact that the world has been racist against Jews without thinking that they've been racist against a lot of other people. It's not only Jews that suffered racism, right? Somehow justifies treating others unequally because, we suffered so much, right? That believing that necessarily means that you are racist. And in the 60s and 70s, they were able to get away with it. It was closer to the colonial era. It was closer to, not having civil rights. But now in this day and age, it's really hard. And that's thanks to Palestinians being so stubborn, so unwilling to capitulate, that the Israelis have had to use more and more force, and having to be more and more transparent about what they're doing, right? Because the old arguments are no longer working. So now, I don't know if you noticed, but the talking points are about Israel is protecting civilization, and we are fighting the barbarians. They're making it this crusade, right? Where they're arguing with Europe that we are protecting you from this Muslim hordes, right? We are the bad. And indeed, I've spoken with, there is this Canadian idiot I remember I spoke with. I was just interested. I wanted to understand, why is he so invested in Israel when he's Christian and he's Canadian and has nothing to do with anything, right? He's in IT. And he said, when I saw the pictures of October 7th, I've never seen something like this in my life. I was like, consider yourself lucky, Habibi, that we've been seeing this for the last 100 years. Thank you very much. That's only a manifestation of your effing privilege that you haven't seen this in your life, right? But for them, it is genuinely, it's about the other. Historically, of course, we need to not underestimate. People do underestimate the legacy of both the Crusades and the Muslim conquests. The Europeans were always petrified of us because, or the East that conquered so quickly, and especially Spain, right? And then coming so close to Vienna, and things like the fact that the Ottomans used to literally steal young Christian boys in the Balkans and make them into janissaries. All of that is history that is, in fact, not only gets carried from generation to generation, it actually has genetic imprints, right? So now there is proof that, African Americans the reason why they have certain chronic diseases is precisely because their genes have changed because of how they needed to deal with stress. So they have high adrenaline. And likewise, people who came from the Holocaust also have genetic changes, and so on and so forth, right? So you have the West that's experienced a scary East that comes and pillages and conquers, right? And then you had the Crusades, where the East is experiencing, and then the colonial era, where the East is experiencing brutal force and power imposed on them, and then cultural power, right? So it's very telling that somebody like Samuel Huntington, who believes in the clash of civilization, somebody as right-wing as him said that people in the West believe that, or he says the West conquered the world through the power of the effective use of military and economic power. People in the West forget that. People in the East never do. And it's so true, right? That all of, oh, it's our democracy. It wasn't the superiority of your values. It was just because you had guns. As simple as that, right? But nobody wants to admit that, right? The Istanbul, right? Constantinople was conquered once the Ottomans had bigger guns. That's what happened. It wasn't like because God was on our side and the angels fought with us. So, but that's not something that is, the reality does not flatter us, anyone, right? The myth is much more flattering. So we stay with the myth. It makes us feel good that we are the good guys and they are the bad guys. Why is that narrative very effective? Because it doesn't require anything of you. You don't need to do anything. The problem is always there. Our values are amazing. We are amazing. There's nothing wrong with us. All the problems are from their side, right? And that's a very, just like now, Trump's popularity. It makes and in fact, it's not just whites. That's what, again, people misunderstand. There are a lot of people of color that love Trump. And it's all because he says, I have the solution. There's nothing wrong with you. It's all these other guys that are wrong, and I'm going to fix everything. Okay, if he's going to fix everything, that's great, because I don't need to do anything, right? And democracies don't work that way. Democracies are all about each citizen shouldering their responsibility. If somebody says, oh, I'm going to fix everything, okay, fix it.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about different things, but I wanted to conclude maybe by asking you if you had a message for Palestinians in Palestine, whether it's related to something that you talked about before or something completely different even.
To be honest, I've never been as pessimistic. Excuse me, my cat is now also, she wants to say something, it seems. She has a last word. I'm usually an optimistic person, but to be honest, the war in Gaza has shaken my faith in humanity. And I am ashamed and I am humbled by the fact that the Gazans are paying the price. I've had Gazan friends who tell me, we're not Palestinians, we're Gazans. And this is a stain on all of humanity. Like, you're watching genocide live and you're still doing nothing, right? So I believe now that until all of us accept that people who have a stake need to be the people who make the decisions, we won't be able to get our rights. And just like, you cannot argue that as a Palestinian that you have a right as a human being, and you have freedoms that need to be protected because the oppressor, the occupation is oppressing you, and then at the same time not let your daughter marry the person that she loves, right? Either you understand freedom, either you understand liberty, or you don't. So we're gonna need to be consistent with our values and not apply them with people that we like and not apply them with people we don't like. And that includes killing civilians, let's agree that killing children is wrong. Whether they are children of Darth Vader or children of Mother Teresa, they should not be killed. So we need, no matter how bad it gets. So that's where we need, I think, those two things. One is accepting and being respectful that, just like with women, she has a right to do whatever she wants to do with her body, You might disagree. You might think that abortion is killing a life, but it's still not your body that's going to pay the price, right? So accepting that whoever is being asked to pay the price needs to be a part of the decision making. And the other is that, yes, the means do matter. We can't just liberate Palestine in all sorts, like we can't nuke our way into liberating Palestine. We need to be better than the Zionists. Otherwise, we're just new Zionists. We're now in a position, because now we are a majority, we're in a position where the Zionists were in the 1930s and 40s, where they knew that they had a right of self-determination and they were perfectly fine exercising it at the expense of the Palestinians. Now, if we decide to exercise our right of self-determination at the expense of Jewish Israelis, we would just be, the new Zionists. And that is a conversation that we need to have in order for our movement to actually genuinely be a movement about rights and not just another ethno-religious group vying for power.
Thank you. And do you have a message for Israelis?
I have to say, I also was shocked at, indeed, they are very ignorant. In many ways, I feel very sorry for them, because it's only now that they're getting the memo that the problem is Zionism. Before I thought they knew that, but now I genuinely realize the extent to which they really are blinded. They are completely clueless to what Zionism is about. They thought it was, nothing is perfect. But no, Zionism is evil. That's new to them, right? So my message to them is, yes, it sucks. It's very scary. But maybe now you realize that you're not going to, apartheid yourself into a safer space. There is no way for you to be safe by making other people not safe. It's just not going to happen. So, but that's very difficult for them to swallow, because they've been told that everybody hates them, nobody understands them. Sure, you can keep telling yourself that story, or you can get out of the cave and look that all of these are shadows, like the allegory of the cave. I don't envy them. It's extremely difficult. Try telling Muslims about the horrors that Muslims have done. They're not willing to accept that. They think Islam is an amazing religion. Nothing's wrong with Islam. Okay, fine. Then, I tell my friends, when you tell non-Muslims that Islam is a religion of peace, it's like, okay, maybe you think that, but that's not what I'm experiencing as a Christian in Iraq, or as a Yazidi, or somebody who survived a suicide bombing. It's like, I don't see that peacefulness in your Islam, right? So we're gonna need to be also the Israelis, understand that it's hard, it's difficult, but it's still better than, and safer for your grandchildren to face this ugliness and try to fix it. It's better to know that you have cancer than to continue to think that it's just a cold.